afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Idaho Partners for Good Breakthrough Series. We are so thankful you chose to learn with us today. The Breakthrough Series was designed to bring people together to help develop stronger, healthier, and better equipped nonprofits. Each month, we invite experts that help us grow professionally while helping you better understand how the Idaho Partners for Good model can help transform our philanthropic sector. We strive to design experiences that are different, a place where people can't wait to come together, talk, and dream big. We invite you to join us on this journey. Connect with us on social media or email us with your ideas. Um, and this month, we have two events for you. Today, our expert will help us discover options that help the business sector make money and do good. And next week, we are going to help you address a key challenge in not only the workplace, but in life. Unconscious biases are part of being human. They influence how we act and make decisions. Can you identify the bias you hold? Do you know how to mitigate them so you can navigate today's world successfully? And in June, Lisa Cooper from Figure 8 Investing is going to talk to us about investing for impact. You can sign up for all these events at the URL you see on the screen. And you can also contact us and stay in touch with us on social media. Sienna, if you can go to the next screen, thank you. And you can always email us with your ideas, and we are ready to talk to you anytime. And I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Sienna George is a Boise native who graduated from Boise State in 2018. During her undergraduate, Sienna launched her own social enterprise through Boise State's Venture College, was named a Stanford Design School University Innovation Fellow, and served as the university's student body president, where she designed and implemented systems-level solutions to campus food insecurity, campus sexual assault, and collaborated with fellow student leaders to institute the university's inaugural Inclusive Excellence Student Council. In 2020, Sienna received her Master's of Art in Social Innovation from the University of San Diego Kroc School of Peace Studies, during which she studied the intersection of higher education and social enterprise models. Today, Sienna lives in Boise, and she works as a social impact strategist to local BCorp Oliver Russell, where she designs tools, strategies, and frameworks for social impact, teaches social entrepreneurship across the Treasure Valley, and pursues her purpose to design social systems that instill individual self-efficacy so that people are empowered to impact the broader human systems with which they engage. When she's not at work, you can find Sienna in the Sawtooths backpacking, on the Boise Basque Block trying new eats, and out for a hike in the foothills. Welcome, Sienna.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you all. So we'll get started. The timing is a little bit off, but that's okay. We'll make it work. So today I just want to kind of share with you all kind of an understanding of the social entrepreneurship and the social enterprise continuum, as well as introduce you to 6 kind of key or fundamental social enterprise forms and functions. And then lastly, equip everyone that's here with a few tools and resources to reimagine our cross-sectoral social impact. Because I think it's always fun to come to a webinar and be equipped with something that you can take with you after we share time together. So thanks for being here, and we'll get started. So I would love it if those that are with us could use the chat to kind of share their own definition of social entrepreneurship, and I will give you just a couple minutes to do that. I'd love to read what you all have to share. So Blossom shared, leveraging the power of a for-profit business for good for people and the environment. I think it's very on point with her. social entrepreneurs today. So thank you. All righty. Well, I will kind of get started here. So first, I kind of wanted to help differentiate the differences between a more conventional entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur. So John Baptiste in the early 19th century, one of the first folks to really talk about this concept of entrepreneurship. And what he said was that an entrepreneur is someone who shifts the economic resources that we have in an area of lower and into an area of higher productivity and greater yield. So entrepreneurs are really those who undertake in order to create new value. These folks are usually driven by value propositions that tend to serve markets and create financial profits for either themselves or sometimes also for shareholders, as opposed to larger, broader stakeholder groups. And finally, these folks tend to be defined by their ability to recognize opportunities, to convert opportunity into marketable solutions that customers are actually willing to pay for. And they oftentimes, of course, assume the risk of the marketplace, which, as we know and have seen, especially throughout COVID, is ever changing. So those are kind of some key distinctions of a conventional entrepreneur. Next is the social entrepreneur. And I love kind of this definition and these characteristics that were defined by Roger L. Martin at the Joseph L. Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, and then by Sally Osberg, who is the president of the Skoll Foundation. So they say that a social entrepreneur holds these three characteristics. The first is that they identify a stable but inherently unjust equilibrium that is often causing the exclusion, the marginalization, or the suffering of a segment of humanity that lacks financial means or political clout to really achieve transformation or benefit on their own. The second characteristic is that these social entrepreneurs identify in an opportunity within that unjust equilibrium, often identifying these gaps in the current ecosystem of challenges and the current solutions that exist in order to develop a social value proposition. And in doing so, they really are bringing to bear these values of inspiration and creativity, courage, fortitude, empathy, resilience, and they really aim to challenge the stable state's hegemony, which is often seen as kind of the status quo of our current social and environmental challenges and situations. And then third, these social entrepreneurs help to forge a new stable equilibrium that actually releases trapped potential or alleviates the suffering of a targeted group. And through imitation and creation of a stable ecosystem around that new equilibrium, they're actually helping to ensure a better future for people and the planet. So I kind of love how they've framed this in regards to this new stable equilibrium for these different stakeholder groups. And additionally, I think a few other differentiators of a social entrepreneur are really the primacy of that social benefit. So they're not just striving for profit, but also how do we pursue mission-related impact? And oftentimes this is framed in this context as a triple bottom line. So social entrepreneurs are often trying to commit themselves to people, planet, and profitability, all within kind of a shared ecosystem of their pursuits. And then another key differentiator is that these folks seek systemic solutions to wicked problems. So those wicked problems are those really challenging, very interconnected, interdependent problems and challenges that we face as an entire globe. And these folks are really looking for root level solutions to address those wicked problems. So they're not just looking at the symptoms of these problems, but they're actually looking at the deeper root causes of why those problems and challenges are being held in place, and how we can actually go about alleviating those challenges from that level, as opposed to kind of band-aiding these larger band-aiding the deeper problems that we're facing. And third, and I think most importantly, is that social entrepreneurs tend to kind of earn a bad rap around being folks that hold a saviorism complex, or that treat entrepreneurship as heropreneurship. So they're going into these contexts and environments and communities that they don't fully understand, and they're dropping in solutions that don't really get at the authentic needs of those that they're trying to benefit. And so social entrepreneurship is really about moving beyond and moving past that bad reputation that we have oftentimes earned. Rightfully so, but there are many now that are trying to evolve into this place of partnership where they're partnering directly with the stakeholders to forge these new equilibriums and really honoring the dignity, the agency, and the efficacy of those previously and commonly seen as only recipients or beneficiaries, and actually transitioning away from that language and that behavior to see these folks as partners in generating these new equilibriums and new solutions. So those are some kind of key differentiators between entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs. And I love this, kind of this idea that both the entrepreneur and the social entrepreneur are motivated by this opportunity that they identify, pursue that relentlessly, and then derive considerable psychic reward from the process of realizing their ideas. So I think that's one of the things that, regardless if you're an entrepreneur driven by profit, or you're an entrepreneur that might be driven more by that social impact or that triple bottom line, these folks really do pursue their ideas very relentlessly and with a lot of purpose and passion to recognize and bring forth something new into our world. So here is a little bit about the social enterprise continuum, and we'll dive a bit deeper with the different forms and functions of social enterprise. But I think this is a really helpful way of kind of framing where social enterprise falls when we're thinking about this continuum between traditional business practices and traditional charity or nonprofit work. And so we have on one side the not-for-profit sector, and then on the other, the for-profit sector. So looking at not-for-profit, of course, these are folks that really, their primacy is around public benefit and they're seeking to create new benefit. They have a pure charitable orientation, and their funding streams are usually received from grants, donations, endowments, things like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have these pure profit-oriented businesses where their revenue comes from sales, shareholders, and investors, and their primacy is really focused on that financial profit. And then that sweet spot right in between is kind of where social enterprise falls. And I think this is a field that is still emergent, it's still changing. And this is the field where folks are really trying to figure out, how do we balance our public benefit and our profit to create some sort of social impact or benefit for people and the planet. So they're intentionally providing products, services, and business models that benefit society and or the environment while using more commercial market strategies. So that is kind of this whole spectrum of social enterprise and where it kind of falls in between those more traditional charities and traditional business. So we can use the chat again. And I would just love to hear, before we kind of jump into some of these key forms and functions that I'm hoping to share with you today, what are some of the social entrepreneurship forms or social enterprise forms that you're familiar with? And it's okay if you don't have any in mind, but I would love to kind of gauge where folks are at. Yes, well, BCorp would definitely be one form, Blossom, and those are all wonderful examples as well, some of which are featured in my next few slides. And it looks like, Roma, I missed your definition of social entrepreneurship, but those who bring forth solutions to social problems, maybe for profit or nonprofit. And I totally agree. In the course I'm teaching on social entrepreneurship right now, we're really trying to equip students with more of the mindsets, frameworks, models, behaviors of social entrepreneurship. And those things definitely can kind of span across that whole continuum, but there are certain ways of thinking and certain behaviors that I think kind of distinguish social entrepreneurs from more traditional entrepreneurship. So thank you. Alrighty, so here are some of the forms that I just kind of want to review with you all. And there are 6 of them. Of course, there are a lot of forms out there, but I think that these are kind of the primary 6 that we see a lot when we're talking about social enterprise. So we will go through these in a little bit of detail, but just know this is very high level, very introductory. And of course, I'm happy to act as a resource to anyone that wants to dive a bit deeper into any of these forms. But we will go through these 6 and I will then answer any questions that you may have. So the first I wanted to talk about is corporate social responsibility. This is an approach that's really initiated by a business as opposed to consumers or stakeholders in order to create this integrated economic, social, and environmental benefit within an existing corporate system or structure. So some of the key features of this form are that corporate self-regulation, in which kind of certain social and environmental markers are part of a pre-existing corporate structure. These things may be added on or made in addition at a later date, or to reposition a company, or to set themselves apart from another for-profit company. They may use CSR initiatives to kind of stand out or create something that's unique to this, to their company culture and their company structure. So some of the things that these folks may do is they're focusing on campaigns around environmental sustainability. They're thinking about corporate philanthropy and how they give in usually very large amounts, because these are usually corporate social responsibility tends to be in bigger company structures. They'll have volunteering days for their employees. They may use ethical marketing practices or campaigns. And they may be amplifying the visions and the work of others in kind of this form and function. So, Levi's has, as an example, worker well-being initiative, where they really focus on the well-being of their employees, and they offer certain benefits, certain classes for their employees as a way of taking care of their people. They also have a water less campaign, where they talk about kind of their manufacturing process and how they're using less water in that process. So these are things that may not really be embedded, and the purpose and the impact might not be embedded from a root level at the company cultural level. So I think it's really important when we talk about CSR to really think about how do we practice CSR in more authentic, more empathetic ways, and how do we also leverage kind of the fact that we may be these bigger resource-rich companies that can really generate true impact if we're partnered with the right folks and we're really amplifying the work of others. So it's important, I think, to kind of consider when we talk about CSR, where these large corporations are best positioned in order to maximize their benefit. So that's a little bit about CSR. I think a lot of us have seen examples of this through things like Starbucks even, but then we've also seen companies like Pepsi sometimes not do the best job of marketing their corporate social responsibility efforts and initiatives. So lots of intentionality around impact needs to be considered when we talk about CSR. The next, and I'm a little bit biased, but I think a wonderful social enterprise form and function is a B Corp. And so a B Corp is a company that has passed the nonprofit B Lab's comprehensive third-party assessment and verification process of its social and environmental impact, practices, and performance. Common misperception is that B Corp stands for Benefit Corp. B Lab is really trying to make sure folks know that the B in B Corp actually stands for better. So it's all about better business practices. So some key features of a B Corp is that they really work to benefit stakeholders alongside their shareholders. So these kinds of companies are really empowered to be thinking about their stakeholders all the time, rather than just maximizing profits for shareholders. Companies take like I said, a comprehensive third-party assessment through the B Lab. They must score a minimum of 80 out of 200 points on that assessment to be certified. It is a rigorous assessment, so that is something that if a company is looking at B Corp certification, they should keep in mind, is that is a time-bound process. And there is a cost associated with it that is based on a company's kind of annual revenue or annual sales that are correlated with how much your certification will cost. And then the B impact assessment itself measures these 5 pillars of a company's impact. So governance, workers, environment, the customers, and of course the community as well. Sorry, I skipped over that one. But those are the 5 pillars that they're measured on. So an example of a question under governance might be, how does your company integrate social and environmental performance into their decision-making? Question under the consumers or the customers might be, what practices or procedures are used by your company to manage the impact and the value created for your customers or consumers? Of course, when we think about the community, it might be around your company's practices regarding donations or community investments. So there's a bunch of different questions that you fill out for your B Corp assessment. That is then reviewed by the B Lab and you earn your score, which then can be used to kind of promote the fact that you are holding yourself as a company to higher standards when it comes to your social and environmental impact and your impact across those 5 pillars of impact. So one key distinction that I think is really important to remember about B Corps is that it is not the same as a public benefit corporation. A public benefit corporation is actually a legal structure for a business, kind of like an LLC or a corporation. And folks that hold that legal structure are legally empowered to pursue positive stakeholder impact alongside their profit. So just keeping that in mind, because the language can get a little bit confusing when we talk about B Corp and Benefit Corp. So a couple examples of these that we have here right in the Valley are Salt, and they're a menstrual cup company, and then they create period wear. Big fan of them. Oliver Russell is where I am joining you all from. Well, when I'm not in my bedroom. And Oliver Russell, we are kind of a branding and marketing agency for social impact companies. And then Treefort, I don't think a lot of people know this, but Treefort Music Festival is actually a certified B Corp as well. So that's another really cool part of the B Corp community, is that they represent over 150 unique industries. They are represented in 74 countries, so it's really a global community. And to date, there are about 3,800 B Corps that span the world. So a little bit more about B Corps. A nonprofit commercial venture is essentially an income-generating business activity that's performed by a nonprofit organization to help them sustain their mission. So when we talk about nonprofit commercial ventures, I think the first thing that tends to come to mind are things like the Idaho Youth Ranch thrift stores that we have here in the Valley, where you go in to purchase something from the thrift store, and a part of that, part of the proceeds or all of the proceeds may go back into the mission of that nonprofit itself. So there are actually 3 kind of typical or distinct forms of nonprofit commercial ventures. So kind of the first one that I talked about is a nonprofit with then paired with a with an income generating commercial arm to what they do. So that's basically where it's a nonprofit, and then they have some sort of business activity for profit and a generating arm to what they do, where the funds are then funneled back into the mission of the nonprofit organization. Another one is 2 nonprofits coming together to actually form a commercial venture. So 2 nonprofits that might have shared or aligned missions could come together and create their own commercial venture. And then the last is a nonprofit partnership with a for-profit company. So I know that Salt has one of these where they're doing beach cleanups. So they are kind of the social enterprise for-profit company that then partners with a nonprofit to support their efforts through a portion of proceeds or sales of a product going back into a mission of a nonprofit. So a few considerations there. One of the really important things to remember for-profit companies that are aiming or that hope to partner with a nonprofit is something called an unrelated business tax, an unrelated business income tax, so a UBI. And those can be charged if a nonprofit organization actively advertises an unrelated product or service. So that's just kind of one of those unintended harms to mitigate or think about when we talk about nonprofit commercial ventures. And there are a few exemptions, including like donated items or food drives. But I like to throw that out there because there are some different things that you need to consider if you're thinking about building these partnerships. And another thing is that a lot of times nonprofit commercial ventures overinvest in the commercial venture when they don't really have all the business chops that are needed to sustain and grow that commercial venture and that aspect of what they're doing. So it's just important to keep that in mind when you are thinking about these sorts of partnerships, and you may be a nonprofit or a for-profit company. And if you get too invested in your commercial venture, you also may start to see some mission drift away from your intended purpose as a nonprofit. So another consideration. Next up, we have the buy one, give one model. And this is a specific form and function of a social enterprise that I think most of us are probably familiar with, in which a company promotes giving one needed item away for every like item sold. So traditionally, this has looked like kind of the founders of a lot of this were the Tom's model, where they gave away a pair for every pair of shoes bought by a customer. They gave away a pair of shoes in a developing country. And kind of what we saw happening there was a lot of unintended harms being created. So jobs being taken away from those countries where they were giving the shoes not being a sustainable solution to the deeper root systemic problems and challenges that folks in these countries were facing. The shoes themselves not even really being the true need of the recipients or the partners in these countries. So a lot of folks that have used this model at one point are now kind of evolving and shifting to make sure that we are addressing things from that more systemic level. So instead of Happy Day Brands is again a B Corp, or I think they're going through their certification process right now, but Happy Day Brands is a Boise-based company, and they sell lots of different kind of food products like coffee and chocolate and oats. And for each product sold, instead of giving that identical product back to the folks that they're trying to benefit, they are partnered with local food banks in the places where they sell their products to make sure that they're providing a meal in exchange for every product sold. So we're kind of seeing this shift in that model to create more means for meaningful impact. And Tom's itself has kind of shifted away from their original model, and they now have 1/3 of their profits going to something called Grassroots for Good, where they're actually supporting people that are building equity at a local grassroots level and driving progress from the ground up. So we are seeing kind of these shifts, and I think there might be a few chats that get dropped in about kind of that shift in that model. And if you're also interested in kind of the economic side of this model, there is a lot of issues with sustaining something like this. If we're thinking about, well, you're only really getting the proceeds or the money for one item, but you're expected to produce or give away another one essentially for free. How does that actually create a sustainable business model for companies? So there's an article that will be shared in the chat around kind of that if you are interested. So quick overview of buy one, give one. The next one we have here is cooperatives. I hope most of you are familiar with the Boise Co-op. That's one example. REI is a much larger example, but cooperatives are essentially a private business or organization that are owned and controlled and sustained by the members of the cooperative themselves. And so they're kind of governed by those 7 principles that you can see there on the screen. And they really, members of cooperatives invest and operate on a one member, one vote principle, so that there maintains kind of a democratic management system of these cooperatives, and that no small group becomes like a primary leader or controller of the co-op themselves. Some folks like to think of these as almost like self-regulated social enterprises, which I loved because that's kind of what they are. It's like members buy into these things, and then they're kind of self-regulating all the practices, ensuring all the principles of cooperatives are being upheld. And cooperatives really focus on individual and mutual benefit. So they're focused on the members of the cooperative themselves, but then they also think about the broader systems and communities that they engage with and belong to, and how they can kind of create added benefits for those communities beyond their immediate cooperative community. And I think this is the last one we have. So a work integration social enterprise, or WISE, is kind of a social enterprise that really focuses on, well, it is a form of social enterprise that prioritizes employment to a specific group of people or demographic who may face barriers to hiring or employment. And oftentimes these run adjacent to an organization in order to actually provide tailor-made work and care simultaneously. So these, we have a wonderful example of a WISE that's also kind of like a nonprofit commercial venture. So some of these enterprise models can actually be mixed, or there can be kind of hybrid models between some of these. But Life's Kitchen is a great example of this, where you have a nonprofit, but they also have this work integration social enterprise aspect to what they do, where they're employing folks who may have had barriers to hiring or employment based on past life experiences and things like that. And so they actually employ folks to create these delicious meals, and they have a whole catering operation. You all can go eat lunch there. It is fantastic. Highly recommend, just all around really wonderful organization. But they would be an example of a work integration social enterprise where they have a mission of really assisting those that are unconnected to or at risk of permanent exclusion from kind of the labor market, or being able to go back to work and gain work experience and training. And these work integration social enterprises really equip these folks with job skills and training. And then they can also produce and sell products or services as their primary revenue generator, while also kind of functioning again in that social impact space where they are supporting and benefiting those who may not have those opportunities as equitably or equally as other folks may. And again, these ones can take on different forms. So they can be in the form of a worker cooperative, which we just learned about. They can be in the form of a community-based nonprofit with a commercial arm. So again, that's kind of like Life's Kitchen, where they're in a nonprofit, but then they have this commercial arm through their catering services and their lunches and the meals that they provide, where that's helping to kind of sustain the organization itself. And they can also take on a quasi-public corporation kind of form, in which a government may actually help to subsidize the WISE because of the benefit and the impact that they're creating for communities. And they actually will invest in these sorts of WISE enterprises. I love that, WISE enterprises, but that they actually invest in these because of the immense benefit that they create for the community. A few things, again, I try to kind of incorporate some of the unintended harms to mitigate when thinking about these forms and functions. There can be social implications for WISEs, of course. There's always going to be folks with prejudice and judgment around employing certain demographics of folks. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then as well as the self-prejudice that may be associated for folks that are going to work or apply to work at a work integration social enterprise, and the fact that they may be being labeled in very specific and oftentimes derogatory ways. So that's something to kind of mitigate when we think about creating opportunities for WISEs to exist and the folks that we are trying to support in these ways. And one really great example that I think does that mitigates those things really well is Greyston Bakery. And they're the folks that make all the brownies for Ben and Jerry's ice cream. They make all the goods that you might buy at all the yummy goods. So brownies, cookies, bakery items that you might buy at Whole Foods. And they actually have an open hiring process and policy. And again, I think there will be a chat with an article about that from the New York Times that just kind of emphasizes how important that is to the structure of Greyston Bakery, but also that it's a very replicable model for other companies to be considering adopting. So, and Homeboy Industries is another great example that I highly recommend. Father Greg Boyle's TED Talk and his books and films. I mean, just really incredible mission and contributions. So finally, before I answer any questions that you may all have, I wanted to provide a few tools and resources to kind of reimagine how we think about social impact across sectors. So the first is a really wonderful article from the Stanford Social Innovation Review about social entrepreneurship and this need and this case for definition, because again, as I've mentioned, I don't think that we are always super clear about what social entrepreneurship really is and the benefit that it can provide. So this article really talks about that full continuum, how we have for-profits on one side and nonprofits on the other, and how can we start to think about the social entrepreneurial mindsets, behaviors, practices that might kind of bridge the gap and help us to think uniquely about what are the partnerships that can be built between those two sectors in really meaningful ways that can help us amplify, elevate, and activate our impact in more meaningful ways. So definitely recommend that, probably about 15-minute read or so. The Impact Gaps Canvas was developed by Daniela Poppy Thornton, who I believe now also works at the school center, but she has done really incredible work kind of around that notion of heropreneurship. And the Impact Gaps Canvas is a tool that can really be used by anyone who wants to just understand the landscape of a problem and potentially identify new paths and possibilities for how they might contribute a more meaningful solution. So it helps you to kind of look at the current solutions that exist and what's working about them, what might be missing, and then also the current challenge that you may be trying to address and what's holding it in place, and then think about the possibilities that emerge from the gaps between those two things. So really great educational resource. She has like a 2-minute video on kind of how that all works. The systemic design framework is something that I was just exposed to within like the last couple of weeks, and it comes from the Design Council's design framework. They're based in the UK, but they offer this really cool, in my opinion, new approach to considering how we might think about systemic design processes and elements, and really connecting our ecosystem of impact resources, whether that be across sectors or whether that be across solutions or different industry, whatever it may be. But how can we start to connect those and then reframe our thinking around more systemic solutions in our design? Development, impact, and you. I absolutely love and rely on this all the time when I'm teaching and when I'm just thinking about solutions. It is a fantastic resource. It's all free, downloadable kind of PDF toolkit that kind of walks you through this process of like, how do I think about social innovation? How do I think about new impact in the most direct, authentic, and meaningful ways? So definitely recommend checking that out. And last but not least, I had to give a plug to some of the work we're doing at Oliver Russell. And we now have 2 courses out. You can find them at Reason to Be or at reasontobe.com/BCorp University. And we have one course that's really developed to equip B Corp employees with kind of an introductory understanding of what it means to be a part of a B Corp, how B Corps earn their certification, why they choose to certify. And then that university edition we created for students and educators specifically to really understand all there is to know about B Corps, because that information can sometimes be a little dispersed. It's kind of hard to find a centralized educational resource that kind of simplifies and condenses all the information around what a B Corp is and how you earn your certification and why it matters to folks. So those are a few resources that I will share with you all. And now that I have talked for so long, I would love to hear if anyone has any questions, comments, or thoughts. And that is my email. So please do feel free to use it, reach out if you have any questions, or would love to chat more about this with you. And thanks again for having me. Blossom. So there's another great resource written by the founder and my boss, Ross Stoddard, called Rise Up. That is a great resource as well for anyone that's interested in how do you start a social enterprise and what does this whole thing mean? So
I've got a question for everyone. And my question is, based on the 6 different models that Sienna has described today, is there any particular model that really stood out as kind of the one that most resonates with you?
I was just kind of curious to hear about stuff. I'm not actually in the process of starting a company, but I saw that Sienna was giving a talk and really wanted to see what she was talking about. But I just thought it was really helpful to hear about kind of the pitfalls of these models. And I am super fascinated by that impact gaps canvas. So I'm going to be looking at that.
Right on. It's good to see you, Anne. And I definitely, I'm glad that some of those pitfalls were helpful, because I think that is also one of the key differentiators between more conventional entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs. Is as social entrepreneurs, we always have to be looking at those unintended harms or consequences to anything that we're putting out into the world. So as wonderful as it may be to create a solution that creates this really positive social impact, what are the environmental consequences or harms that we need to be thinking about? So kind of checking for our blind spots, and all of these models, I think, have them in their own ways. So how can we best mitigate those things? And some of that, I think, is just that awareness. But I think everybody always thought that B Corp, meant Business Corp. Interesting. See, I always thought that they meant Benefit Corp, which then I was corrected by someone at the B Lab.
So I'm wondering, and because the way that you talked about the corporate social responsibility model, my question is around, do they work? Is there some data that actually shows that that's a model that really should be replicated? Or is it mostly just a marketing promo for a company?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I totally have the answer to the research side of that. I would be interested to know as well, but I do know I spoke with a young woman at, I think, University of Oregon, has a program all based around kind of like brand ethics and advertising sustainably. And so I think it's still kind of an emergent and TBD field of study and practice to really know what are the principles that have to be constantly foundational to CSR in order for them to really create a meaningful impact. And I think there are examples out there of folks that have done it well, but I think there's more evidence to show that a lot of times CSR falls short in terms of the authentic and meaningful impact that those sorts of movements or marketing tactics really create. And I think the difference is in how embedded those practices really are from a company culture standpoint and understanding, and how authentic they really are, as opposed to, like you said, just a marketing tactic to gain new customers. Yeah, and Janice, I also think one of the things I didn't mention when I was talking about B Corps is one of the unintended kind of harms or risks to mitigate with B Corp certification is definitely the fact that it's self-reported, that it happens the certification process happens every 3 years. And it's also, the B Lab itself is pretty resource constrained. So I think that there is not always really built in support, especially for newer applicants, that to really understand the purpose and the meaning behind B Corp certification and what its true potential for impact can be if done well.
Is there room for the creation of a new model somewhere between the for-profit and the B Corp model? Because what I've heard, especially locally from business leaders, is while they really like the concept of a B corporation, the actual certification process is too onerous for them. And so I'm wondering if there is a middle ground somewhere.
I would love to hear if anyone else has thoughts on that as well, but I definitely think so. I think that's something I think about a lot in our work and being a B Corp, is that it's not a one size fits all kind of impact assessment or a true, the only true indicator of a company or an organization's impact either. And I think we could do with a new and evolving model always. I'm always more of a proponent that our models and the things that we're using to create new impact should be iterative and evolving with us. Just as we expect the impact to evolve, I think we should expect the models for which we measure and create and grow our impact to evolve as well.
So you've done a great presentation, Sienna. Mike, another question I have is around these different models. Is anyone collecting data around who's out there in these different, using these different enterprise models?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I know that we have a B Corp, we have the B Corp directory, of course, for B Corps that are certified. But not that I'm aware of for like folks that are not like a comprehensive body or collection or community even of these different forms and functions. Not that I'm aware of.
Where do you get the B Corp directory?
Just through the B Labs website, which I think might have been shared in the chat, but they have a little tab for their directory and you can search on there by industry as well as region and state and all of that good stuff.
So this might be another question of like, this data doesn't exist yet, but I'm curious, like, do any of these models, like, I know there's kind of a balance between like having an impact and actually like having your organization not like go under financially. So like, are there certain models that tend to be better for that? And I'm sorry if you already answered my question because I jumped in late because work.
So your question is like, are there models that kind of are assessing for both the impact and the economic kind of, or the financial sustainability of the company?
Yeah, like, or are there models that are more financially sustainable than others?
I don't again know the answer to that. I would love to know. And I think some of that might have to do more with kind of when we think about the models that I was presenting on, the differences in kind of resources and sizes of these companies. So for CSR, I'm sure if we were to like take an aggregate of the CSR companies out there and then take, you know, a nonprofit commercial venture and Wise's, I think there'd be a huge gap in how kind of sustainable their income and profitability is. But I think a lot of that has to do with the kind of sector and positioning within the industry that they each hold. But I would love to know like which ones balance their impact and true impact. Again, I think we probably need a new way of measuring like what do we mean when we say impact and how do we define that? And that's kind of what that article on the case for social entrepreneurship's definition gets at, is that we need to be really clear about what we're talking about in order for us to create new metrics and evaluation for these sorts of impact-driven companies.
As a business owner, a female entrepreneur, the first model that you create is the model for making money in your own business, right? Because B Corp is a relatively new thing. I know that Oliver Russell has been a B Corp for, gosh, maybe 10 years or something. And that's got to be one of the oldest because we're only a B Corp 2 years old and we were one of the first in our professional area in the United States. So B Corp, came as a result of European and it came from Europe to the East Coast and then traveled to the West Coast in terms of knowledge. And so now we have companies that they have a unique business model based on the, as you said, Sienna, the sector or the industry that they're in. And then you couple that with the B Corp strategy and purpose-driven culture, and that intertwines to create a new company. But what will happen in the future clearly is that there will be the B Corp model, perhaps before there ever is the entrepreneurial financial model, which will completely reform, reshape how businesses are created. So we're still very much in the early stages of seeing how B Corps are impacting business as a whole, which is very exciting.
I guess that's where I was heading in my head around the fact that if B Corps are really having the kind of impact that they want, how do we promote that in ways that more traditional for-profit companies get the message that it really is about the triple bottom line and not just about the profit?
Well, I think you and I were talking about this a couple of days ago. There's a real movement right now in the Boise marketplace and the marketplace across the country for both people who are employed and volunteers, that 50% of those people are looking to change jobs. And that's a pandemic related statistic. And with that, we have the opportunity for companies to attract talent. And you can't make a bottom line profit or have a purpose, a successful purpose-driven company unless you have the right talent in your wings. So that will become first and foremost is people, and the people right now have the voice for companies. So that's shifting everything.
I'm curious, Foster, I'm going to ask you a question specifically about coming from the government side. How does this apply, if at all? And is there a way, because you guys are going to have the same issues on hiring as everybody else will, but how do these types of models, how do you see them working?
Well, I joined late, so I'll give the same answer that Sienna gave a couple of times. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. I think this was really my first exposure to B Corp. I always thought a B Corp and a LLC and a C Corp, those were all corporate entities. I've not been through this before, so I don't know how to answer your question, Blossom. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. I just, as we're thinking about how we lift all boats when it comes to our people, planet, and profit, how it's going to include government, for-profit, nonprofit. How do we really get that message out in a way that is going to work, depending on who you are and what you do, in the best way that really does keep you sustainable? I mean, government, that's a whole nother model, but even government needs to be pushed to get a lot more dialed in on their the people, planet, and profit.
Government especially needs to be pushed.
I definitely think that this is kind of where the practices in the School of Thought of Systems Thinking really could help us. And Daniela Poppy Thornton talks a lot about mapping the systems. And so I think, and I can share a book, I don't remember the title right now, but there's a great book about systems thinking too, that just really helps us to see kind of all the different players, and also kind of illuminate some of our systems ignorance around, like, we don't really understand how each other function, and therefore it becomes really hard to map the systems and where we might best fit into benefiting one another in our work, but then also benefiting the environment and society as a whole. So I will. Thank you.
Thank you.